Hi, everybody. Welcome to this session at Wonk Week. My name is Josh Finley, and I'm a Customer Success Manager at Quorum. We're going to give folks a minute or two to join the call, and then we'll get started. Again, welcome to this session of Wonk Week. We're just giving everybody a minute to join, and then we're going to go ahead and get started. So I see that our numbers have come up, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So once again, I am Josh. I am a Customer Success Manager here at Quorum. And today we're here to discuss White House Advocacy, the International Rescue Committee's Afghanistan campaign. Before we dive in, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First, this session will be recorded, and the recording and slides will be distributed after the event. Second, you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen a chat box and a Q&A submission form. We encourage you to use the chat throughout the session to share insights and submit your questions to the Q&A session as you think of them. Then we'll go through the questions at the end of the presentation. And with that, we're ready to dive into the session, why we're here. I'm really excited to be joined here today by Melinda Frimpong, the Digital Advocacy Senior Officer at the International Rescue Committee. I've had the pleasure of being able to work with her for about 2 years now, I'd say, and she is absolutely one of my favorite people. So I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about herself and the work she does at IRC. Off to you, Melinda.
Thank you so much for that intro, Josh. Yes, like Josh said, I am the Digital Advocacy Senior Officer here at the International Rescue Committee. I have been at the IRC now for about 5 years, and my background spans kind of in-house work as well as agency work. But my focus for the past few years has really been about building and boosting our entire digital advocacy program into what it is today. So I will go ahead and share my screen and we can get into it. One second. Okay, Josh, you can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, I can't see you, so just stop me at any time. So today I will start with a brief overview of the IRC before I go into our work in Afghanistan as an organization, before we really parse out what this digital advocacy campaign looked like, what our CTAs were, our performance, and also the Q&A section. So I'll just kind of leave it here for a minute so people can kind of digest, see what we have coming up. And Josh, as always, stop me if there's a lot of questions that are necessary. So who we are. The IRC was founded in 1933 at the bequest of Albert Einstein, which means this year we celebrated our 90th anniversary. We have a staff of over 22,000 employees that operates in 52 countries, and we also have a presence in 28 US cities. So the IRC is an international humanitarian aid, relief, and development organization, but we are also within the US one of 9 refugee resettlement organizations in the country. So that's why we're also we have resettlement offices in about 28 US cities. To also give you a scope of our work, we were able to reach 32.9 million clients in FY22. For the clients that we serve, what I've written on this slide is a gross understatement of who we serve. So we do serve refugees and asylum seekers and others facing forced displacement, but we also serve and support survivors of trafficking, internally displaced persons, special immigrant visa recipients, individuals who have received humanitarian parole, temporary protected status holders, and so much more. And in addition, for the sample of services that we provide that we were able to reach 32.9 million clients with, we provide cash assistance, early education and learning programs, which one of our most famous is called Alan Simsim, which is in partnership with the Sesame Workshop Foundation. We provide primary healthcare consultations, nutrition services to address acute malnutrition, gender-based violence counseling for survivors. We also have a program called Signpost, which is an informational service that delivers critical information through staff equipped with digital tools, digital channels, and social media, providing communities with timely and actionable information to make critical decisions on the issues that matter most to them. Like I said before, that's simply just a snapshot of our work. And as always, if you're interested in learning more about the IRC and our programming, please go to rescue.org. So with that said, I do also want to dive deeper into our digital advocacy program to kind of level set us here with this session. This program was formalized in 2018, so we are still very much in our infancy. Basically, this program was developed because at the time in the US, sentiment seemed to be growing in the public sphere, but also within political leaders, sort of leaning towards anti-refugee sentiments. And we wanted to know that if we provided the public with information about refugees, how the program works, could that perception be changed? Very long story short, yes. So most of our digital actions from July 2018 to August 2021 focused within our refugee resettlement work, our asylum work, and also what we call our integration work within the US. Our integration work within the US focuses on very localized kind of actions, bills, and needs of communities. So some of that work includes, pushing for bills that allow refugee children to graduate high school in 7 years instead of 5, to kind of account for kind of educational discrepancies or pauses that they might have had in their life. Advocating for either the creation or funding of offices for new Americans at the state government level, which would allow anyone who is new to the state or the community from outside of the US to kind of have a one-stop shop to kind of get more information about like how to integrate within communities and whatnot. Pushing for language access bills so that we also can provide information to communities in their local languages from official government tips. So sometimes, like for those who are in New York, that means things such as, when you go and vote and the signs don't just say vote here, they say vote aquí. They're in Haitian Creole, they're in Spanish, they're in Mandarin, and every sort of language. So that's kind of holistically what our program was focused on, and also what our list was conditioned to going into August 2021. Also with that, we began using phone to action in October 2020, and we used phone to action only to send out SMS messages and also for the creation of our take action pages. We do not use phone to action for our email outreach, and that's only because the email outreach program that's been developed by other teams at the IRC was so robust that to make the kind of pivot over would have been a lot of work. So it was not because we don't think that the program has benefit, it just was it wasn't a need at the time. And also to kind of give everybody an idea of what we were working with, our SMS list at the time, which was the focus of the digital advocacy program, was about 30,000 people. Now that number does include opt-outs, and our email contacts was the size was over 157,000 people, and that also includes ongoing donors. So that's not just solely digital advocates. Just want to get those caveats before people from other teams yell at me. Okay, so with that said, let's get into our Afghanistan advocacy. So due to the shift of power in Afghanistan in August of 2021, we knew we had to mobilize. But one of the things that we as an organization have to grapple with is for a lot of these countries and governments that we push for, we also have a presence in these countries, which means that we also have to factor in kind of local nuances and local outreach within our work. So with that being said, we began our work in Afghanistan in 1988, launching relief programs for people displaced by the invasion of the Soviet Union. The majority of the country is reliant on foreign humanitarian aid and NGOs. We have 4,800 staff members who currently work in thousands of villages and communities across 9 provinces. Afghans make up more than 99% of IRC staff in the country today, and 33% of our staff are women who work in the health and education sectors. To also give everyone on the call today a better idea of kind of what the humanitarian needs are for Afghans currently. Currently, 29.2 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance. That was triple the amount since before August 2021, and it's the highest number of any country in the world since 2020. Afghanistan has the 3rd largest population of refugees in the world at 5.7 million. 1.6 million of these refugees live in neighboring countries. 3.4 million people are internally displaced as of June 2022. 17 million people face acute hunger. Afghanistan has one of the highest rates of malnutrition, with close to 3.2 million children and 840,000 pregnant and nursing mothers suffering from severe acute malnutrition. And in addition to all of that, the likelihood of extreme weather events in Afghanistan, which is already prone to natural disasters, is rising due to climate change, such as the recent devastating earthquakes, which have killed over 1,200 people and have injured 12,000 as of mid-October. So these stats from prior to August 2021 to now are things that we always keep in mind with our public and private advocacy, because it does really help us kind of put into perspective the scale of humanitarian need and how we approach our advocacy and also our policy solutions. So with that being said, I kind of divvied up this campaign into 3 phases kind of for this discussion today. So going into phase 1, we launched in August of 2021. It was something that we did as a bit of a test, because prior to this point, we hadn't done any outreach for any of our country program work to our advocates. Only people on our list who happen to be advocates and donors might have seen kind of bits and pieces and education about our work in Afghanistan historically, but it wasn't something that we had messaged about before. But it was an organizational priority, so we knew that we needed to kind of do outreach on it. Our goal in phase 1, kind of separate but in tandem with these public policy objectives, was to convey the urgency of the spiraling humanitarian situation in Afghanistan to policymakers. And it was also to secure full funding of the humanitarian response that would help mitigate the fallout of the political instability that came with the shift of power. So all that to say is that as an organization and also as a global policy and advocacy team, we knew that the needs in Afghanistan were going to be great. And we knew we needed to do advocacy work, public and private work, to respond to what we knew was going to be a potential humanitarian catastrophe. So with phase 1, we launched to really help Afghans find refuge in the US and Europe, but also to assist Afghans who are unable to flee to safety after August 2021. So we did our initial outreach to the White House. We had been doing quite a bit of private advocacy, but due to the response in the media, we figured, let's try and see what the response is from our digital advocates. They have responded to emergencies before, but that was US-based emergencies. So let's try it and see if this can supplement our private advocacy work. So this, I feel like I'm repeating myself, so apologies. But this was part of our broader strategy with our comms team, to urge not just the US, but also the EU to provide much needed funding to the humanitarian response and to position IRC as a leader in Afghanistan as we provided humanitarian aid in the country for 30 years. Phase one was part of 6 key policies we felt that we could influence through strategic advocacy and communications with Congress or the president. So we made the conscious decision during phase one to target the White House, because at this point in time with the list, we had seen a great response with directing our advocates to targeting the White House as opposed to their congressional leaders. I think it might have been because it was in the aftermath of an election. So people kind of really felt that they could sway the tides either way. So we launched this and we started to see that we were getting a really great response. So as part of this work, we started working closer with our marketing team to get emails out to supporters, because our communication teams was doing a fantastic job with their outreach on our social media channels. They were doing it with op-eds, interviews, press releases, and everything included. Our fundraising teams were also fundraising to assist in our programs in Afghanistan, to help Afghans. And we started to see that the response was performing so well that we felt the need to not only send this initial take action email that you see on the left of the screen, but also we decided to send a thank you email that you see on the right of the screen to supporters, because the support and outreach that we saw from general IRC supporters and advocates was so broad and ongoing that it was something that we felt the need to thank them for their work. And also, we were sending a lot of emails, a lot of text messages. They were seeing a lot of social media posts. We were updating our website all the time. You probably during the time saw IRC spokespeople on the news, might not have known it was them, but we were doing a lot of work and people were really responding, and it was something that we just saw kind of beneficial. So as you can see with these emails, we as an advocacy team are a bit long-winded, but we did feel that it was important to explain the situation for folks. And we did see that people did take the time to kind of read our emails, read our content, and continue. So that was phase one. Just wanted you guys to see these as examples. So we moved on to phase two. And because the response was so engaged, we started to incorporate our asks toward Congress and our public messaging to supplement our public advocacy that was still going to the White House, because we did see a desire for folks to engage on both sides. So we were still directing emails, phone calls, tweets to President Biden, but people also wanted to send what they could to their members of Congress. So a lot of our asks during this time of phase two, and this screenshot is just an example of one of many. It was an ask around a continuing resolution to increase funding to address the ongoing and growing humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. So what we also decided to do in phase two was to tie our public advocacy work to our private advocacy work. This is a tactic we do a lot as a team, because we find that it's incredibly helpful to supplement our private engagement on the Hill, or even with private meetings with the administration if we can get them, because it's very helpful for our staffers to walk into a meeting and say, you know, your constituents really care about this issue, at the same time that their email inboxes are getting inundated, their voicemails are getting flooded. They might be seeing a lot of tweets from it, depending on who they are. So this was a very cognizant tactic that we wanted to do to increase pressure, not only within Congress, but to have that be kind of the crux for Congress to also pressure Biden to do a bit more. So our private advocacy at the time, our advocacy team was conducting White House, Treasury, and congressional briefings. At the same time, we were doing live testimonies, behind the scenes negotiations and discussions, policy brief publications, press release distributions, earned media coverage, social media amplification, and creative content. So for us, this was really an all hands moment as an organization. So a lot of people were pushing a lot of content. We were seeing such a great response at this point that we decided to do an acquisition effort. for the digital advocacy program. So the digital advocacy program, like I said before, is still very small, and we are still very much in our infancy. So our budget to kind of do a lot of work and or testing is extremely limited, just because we kind of need to boost it and whatnot. But we had decided we wanted to do an acquisition effort at this time to kind of get people onto the list and conditioned and diversify who we had on the list. Because, like I said earlier, a lot of our folks came in conditioned under one kind of set of work that we attend to. But as an organization, we cross broad swaths of clients, of work. So we wanted to kind of diversify our list a little bit more to aid in kind of list hygiene and retention. And I'll get into those specifics a little later on. But also with phase two, we kind of increased how diversified our asks and outreach was. So with that said, I do want to share a video created from our team around this time that we used in ads.
We spoke to teenagers about their concerns for the future.
The only thing that were old visions of Afghanistan 20 years ago.
I saw in the news girls have already stopped going to school out of their homes, and restrictions for women have started.
Maybe a day will come that we will no longer go to school. Maybe our country will be like the sun's friend. 1 year ago, my cousin received a trip about my school. It said, "Do not go. We will attend school and we will girls." I feel like I cannot breathe in the moments when I think about this.
My mother is moderate. She could go to school. And from that time to now, a lot has changed.
Now goes to college and university. I wish to what I'm doing outside. But the fighting is in the day. It's harder than back.
I want to try meditation and listen. How I feel that.
I get sick when I think about what will happen in the future, my goals, and my dreams. Women always need to be cool and rights. Alone, I cannot build the future of Afghanistan.
Since these have been recorded, the former Afghanistan government has been ousted from Kabul. Women and girls are calling to be heard. The international rescue community continues to support them no matter what. Donate.
All right. And apologies for that echo. Very sorry. And that leads me into phase three, if it lets me go. There we go. Phase three. So with continued efforts from our communication teams and fundraising teams, we started to see real headways within our advocacy outreach. And that enabled us to kind of sit and think about, from our private advocacy, where would we need continued support from the public and IRC advocates? And where did we think we could apply additional pressure to the White House if it wasn't direct? So this enabled us to kind of think about this, revamp how we thought about our work, and kind of come out with different asks that kind of combined our previous work of, US-based resettlement, asylum, and integration work, but also this new angle of our country program advocacy. So from September 2022 to now, our two main asks in the public sphere, at least, have been boosting humanitarian aid funding for Afghanistan and asking Congress to pass the bipartisan Afghan Adjustment Act. So I want to focus on number two for a little bit right now. So for Afghans who arrived to the US or to a safe haven in August of 2021 and for a bit of time afterwards, they were able to come to the US under a policy called humanitarian parole. Humanitarian parole allows for, in this context, allows for Afghans to have status within the US and also allows them to work. However, humanitarian parole is not a permanent status. And if it is not redesignated, there are very few pathways that these people can take and pursue to remain in the US. And this is something that's quite at odds because, particularly for this population, if they had been able to come to the US through the US Refugee Admissions Program, they would have had full status, full rights, and within 5 years been able to apply for US citizenship. There's pros and cons both ways. We can get into the nitty gritty at a different time. But the Afghan Adjustment Act really would push to allow these Afghans it would create a pathway for those on humanitarian parole to become legal permanent residents and ultimately have those people, if they so choose, apply to become US citizens. So we decided to make this the focus of our public advocacy because we had been doing a lot of work behind the scenes in coalition efforts with peer organizations and also with congressional members. And we did see that there was bipartisan support. And we thought this was really beneficial to put out because for the public, it was an instance in which this is a bill that has support from both sides of the aisle. But it also, because it has bipartisan support, makes it, once it's passed, a very easy bill for the Biden administration to sign and support. And it's a win kind of all across the board. But unfortunately, like with most things that happen with Congress, AAA is kind of one of those longstanding bills in which there is bipartisan support and it does remain, but due to kind of midterms, a lot of that engagement and work has had to be kind of re-upped with new members of Congress, reminding old members of Congress kind of where this bill stands and pushing for additional support and outreach. So we're still doing public work on AAA in addition to private work. And in addition, because Afghanistan is still a country in which there are so many people in need, we are constantly asking for Congress and the administration to boost humanitarian aid funding. So this screenshot is just on AAA, but we still are doing a lot of work for humanitarian aid funding in a broader scheme, but also specific to this crisis. So that leads me into campaign performance. So prior to this, our program was performing quite well, I would say. So our legislator connections for the fiscal year up to the beginning of August was a little bit over 49,000, which to us was pretty great. But this campaign just kind of proved to us that we have an untapped source of advocates who are really engaged on our work and want to continue taking action that we weren't aware of. And it's also enabled us to kind of evolve as a program. So what does that look like? On these few campaigns alone that I call like under our broader Afghanistan campaign, advocates sent over 60,000 emails, made 375 calls, and tweeted nearly 1,000 times to the White House and their members of Congress. I should also say prior to this campaign, most of the focus of our advocacy actions with Phone to Actions were just asking people to email their legislators. But because the response was so broad, we did decide to enable kind of the triple back-to-back actions that Phone to Action allows. So the calls and the tweets were simply organic. Like that wasn't even something we were proactively asking people to do when we were texting them or putting them in our email. Those are 100% organic, and that's how passionately people felt. And all of the folks who made phone calls or tweeted also emailed. So they were very engaged. Our SMS and email advocacy action campaigns brought in 37,000 new advocates. Only 10,000 of those folks were people that we did through paid acquisition channels. So the vast majority were completely organic and had seen our work from being shared within broader spaces, or, you know, like their friend took action, so they forwarded on the text message, or they posted it on their Facebook or Twitter feed. So within that 37,000 new advocates who came, 24,000 of them also contacted their elected officials. So they didn't just join our list for updates, they actually went and took action. Overall for us, there was a 63% increase in advocates who took action year over year. And there was an increase of legislator connections of almost 250%. I should also say that IRC's fiscal year is October through September. So we saw this boost near the end of the fiscal year, which is quite unheard of because for us, August is August recess with Congress. So not many people really are doing much work. And even like within the White House, typically there's a lot going on. So people, in general, we usually see a lull within our digital advocacy work, but that clearly was not the case here. And within that, about 20% of all of our subscribed advocates were people who took action on more than one campaign that fiscal year. And nearly 5% of them took action on 5 or more campaigns in the same fiscal year.
Melinda.
Yes.
We have a couple of questions related to the specific performance, so I want to make sure that we're able to address them.
Yes.
First was, what was that number when it comes to advocate emails to the White House compared to Congress? Do you have that breakdown?
I don't have that written down, but I can get it for you.
Okay, perfect. And then did you happen to see if there was a drop off at any point across it between the two? Like after a while, was White House emails more successful over congressional, or did they both perform at the same rate?
So the White House, like the campaigns and pages that we had set up directed towards the White House, overall performed better than the congressional actions. But I would say performance between the two remained pretty steady for about 8 months. So our actions targeting Congress, kind of the response rate for those actions was pretty level over 8 months, and same with the White House. But there was a clear difference in how well the White House they both performed well, but our White House directed advocacy performed, to my memory, which could be faulty, but performed better than our congressional pages.
Awesome. And then kind of lastly, related to that, when emails were being sent to the White House, and you were obviously targeting, also social media, the campaigns, the videos, the tweets, did you have any kind of follow up from any of the White House administrators, officials talking about this so that you knew that these were being seen and able to then turn that into did it impact overall the decisions that were being made?
Yes. I'll get into a little bit into the next slide.
Perfect.
But one of our tactics as a broader advocacy team is kind of using Quorum, but also using like our ongoing Hill meetings and ongoing kind of outreach to offices to see if our language is getting picked up by offices for their in their public messaging and whatnot. And we did see a lot of uptake in the way that people were talking about the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. A lot of that did mirror messaging that either we put out as an organization, we joined on as a coalition, or language that kind of was informally or formally agreed upon with peer organizations who also either had a presence in Afghanistan or were responding to the crisis. So that definitely did happen. I don't have any screenshots of those examples, but that definitely was something that we did note as a broader team. So I'll use that to go into our non-digital successes. So Biden did sign an executive order that freed up $3.5 billion in frozen assets for Afghanistan. The Treasury Department provided clarity on sanctions and a general license that authorized commercial and financial activity in Afghanistan. The World Bank Board approved the release of $1 billion for the Afghan Reconstruction Trust Fund to support Afghans. Biden also announced the extension of temporary protected status for Afghans, allowing them to find safe haven in the U.S. So temporary protected status is similar to humanitarian parole, in which, it is a temporary status, but it allows people to have some form of status while they are here in the US and also work. So I would say, in layman's terms, the biggest difference between humanitarian parole versus temporary protected status, aka TPS, is that humanitarian parole is provided to kind of bring people to the US in an expedited form. And TPS is a program that allows individuals from a different country who already happen to be in the US for a number of reasons to allow them to remain, because it acknowledges that the situation in their home country has deteriorated so much that it is not safe for them to return. So a lot of these pieces, like, we can't necessarily directly tied to our advocacy work in like a very fleshed out, here's an XYZ format, but these were things that were really pushed on a private scale, that were pushed also with our public advocacy. And in addition to that, millions of Afghans were able to kind of receive critical aid, and thousands were able to seek refuge in the US as well. So that's my presentation. So any other questions, I'm very happy to answer.
Yes, I'm going to remind people to go ahead and feel free to submit any questions that you have, but we're going to go through some that have already been submitted.
Okay.
So
I'm
one
going to
thing,
stop sharing my screen if that's okay.
that's perfect. Something that came up was talking about the kind of the importance between cross-departmental cooperation and collaboration and the success of this campaign. Can you talk a little bit more about how important that was, and advice you might give to any other organizations who might be struggling to be able to, they might not have the relationship with their marketing team. They might not be able to have the resources to be able to do the video. How do you go about being able to address that when it comes to advocacy and public affairs?
So for us, it is absolutely and fundamentally crucial, because we are such a large organization and we cover such a broad swath of work. So the way that it kind of has worked for the IRC in recent terms, and I say that like kind of in a post-COVID world, is that we have broader sync calls in which we kind of request for folks from our marketing team, our advocacy teams, our communication teams, our analytic teams, our programs, and any other relevant teams to kind of get together on a call, to kind of discuss the needs from everyone's program and or department, so that we can coordinate a little bit easier. Because what we find time and time again is that we are all pushing for the same exact type of work or outcomes. So it does us a disservice to kind of work in silos. So it's something that we really kind of push for, and we have that ongoing engagement. It is by no means perfect. I don't think any organization does that in a perfect way, but it is absolutely crucial. And it also enables us to kind of figure out what is going on in like kind of other sides of the house versus what we have going on. So like the video I showed today, our advocacy team has never and will never have capacity to do that on our own. But it enabled us to say, okay, well, you know what? Our marketing and creative departments have capacity and time to set that up. So is there any way that we can get an advocacy ask in there? Or because they've been in these meetings, will they just go ahead and proactively put that in the piece? Because the CTA at the end of that video was a donate ask, but we still were able to get in a piece saying like, I want to call President Biden and tell him to do more. So even just having that kind of engagement for us is really critical. And the results, even if like the CTA ultimately isn't beneficial for my team or a different team or somebody else, it helps us send out a very cohesive kind of picture to the general public and lets people know kind of at not necessarily a granular scale, but a more nuanced scale that our work kind of transcends a lot of different outputs.
So I think you also touched on something there about, the video itself. Not only was it, used for advocacy, but it was collateral that was originally made for fundraising, right? So
Mhm.
I think, can you talk a little bit more to the aspect of how sometimes advocacy or fundraising can drive engagement on either side and how they can go hand in hand, specifically in the work that you do?
Yeah. So we have naturally and through analysis have seen that for us, the best space for monthly donors is our advocates. So our advocates turn into monthly donors pretty quickly, and they don't tend to drop off unlike other sustainers. So it is something kind of within our teams that we have built a relationship between departments. It's taken time because, like I said, nothing is easy or perfect. And we also have we will have different emergencies or different outlooks. And, like, for example, historically, this program is always kind of focused on more state specific work versus a lot of our marketing collateral. Like, if you've ever gotten an email from IRC, you'll see it focuses a lot on emergencies or country programs. But because we have spent time just kind of working at a top level and also getting more nuance within our programs, you will also see that every single digital advocacy action that you take within the daisy chain, you will end up on a donation form right after. Or what we will do is, a lot of times, if our marketing team is doing kind of a campaign that fits, like, we have a public advocacy action, but it's something that, we want to test, or we don't necessarily know what the public response is, or we can only say so much in public versus private. Sometimes, like in the footer of their ongoing outreach or emails, we'll add in a PS asking people to kind of take action or learn more about our work in a broader sense. So even when it's not directly tied to the same outcome, we have kind of worked to see what is mutually beneficial to both teams, even if it's a low lift.
Awesome. I'm loving these questions coming in, so keep submitting them, y'all. Another one, do you have any advice for an organization that has mainly relied on email outreach for digital advocacy, but is looking to launch a more mobile message program?
Yeah, I mean, that was IRC before we had a digital advocacy program. Um, I think it, I think you need to make it clear of what you want the ultimate outcomes for your mobile program to be. Is it you want to really build a base of advocates with mobile? Is it you really want to build a base of donors? You want to build a base of both, because that will kind of help you judge how you kind of do that work and how you flesh those programs out. So for us, initially, the focus of the SMS program was just kind of building an advocacy base and an advocate base. So for me, like, the ROI of the investment that we did is drastically different than our marketing team. But we knew, like, for example, we were like, okay, if we're going to do any acquisition effort for mobile numbers, can we see if we can also get emails for these folks? So it's still benefiting another team and it's still helping us grow our additional program. And now we use our SMS program for both advocacy and fundraising. So we have sat together and said, okay, what does a journey now look like for people who join the SMS list when they're getting text messages? Or for people who are brand new to the file, like, what does that look like? What is their first welcome email before they fall, or welcome text message before they fall into the stream? And then also thinking about, which I think is very, very, very important for mobile, even more than email, is thinking about cadence and frequency, because people find that their phones are a lot more personal than, like, your email inbox. And I forget what the stat is, but, like, I believe it's over 90% of text messages are opened right when they're sent. So it's always thinking about, like, okay, I want to make sure I'm sending people text messages, but not too much that they get overwhelmed, but not too little that they forget who we are about. And a big thing to worry about with text messages, especially in our space, is election years. You absolutely do not want to end up being confused with, like, the DNC or the RNC or various other kind of voting programs, because then people just kind of they get inundated and they unsubscribe to everything, even if they wanted to see on your program. So that is the one pain point we always have every election year, is thinking about kind of cadence and how we have to adjust.
Thank you. Let's see, what else is there? Okay, so are there specific elements you would or would not replicate in future campaigns?
Ooh. Good question. Yes and no. I mean, I think for us, Afghanistan is a very unique case. I would say for us, for replicating, definitely speed to market. Even if we don't have a very fleshed out kind of solution. So IRC also dubs itself as a solutions-based NGO. So a lot of the internal debate that I have within my own team is sometimes people really want to wait until we have a clear and fleshed out solution to a problem before we start doing public engagement. And sometimes I kind of have to say to people, like, these are people who are just looking for something to do. If we can just give them one solution, it doesn't have to be inclusive of an entire problem, and it doesn't have to be, perfect. But if we can give them kind of one solution or one clear CTA, that's something to push out. And it's definitely helped us in further emergencies. One thing I think I wouldn't do, I don't know. In terms of like digital advocacy campaigns, this was pretty painless. I guess I would also say I would do more acquisition around this campaign if I could, and I would have done it earlier when there was still a lot of interest, because we picked up acquisition a bit on like the later side of things. So I guess I wouldn't wait that long. I would do it earlier. That's helpful.
That kind of leads to like the next question, and you can say, hey, I just answered it if you want. But can you talk about some of the lessons learned along the way and like what you wish you had known and like starting that you now know?
Yeah. So definitely acquisition. And I would say the one big thing that I think that I haven't spoken to yet that we're still grappling with is really thinking about, as early as possible, the future plans for these newly acquired names or this audience, because we had a lot of organic folks come in too. Like, what is the future plan? Because we didn't stop to think about until, in my opinion, it was a little too late that, okay, these are people who are very Afghanistan focused. And even though we kind of swapped up our asks to include something on like the Afghan Adjustment Act, and that is more US based, like that is still on the same topic of Afghanistan. And that is not even the sole country we work on or the sole topic that we engage on. So how do we also, especially for people who are new to the file, how do we really socialize them and get them to understand the breadth of our work as an organization, not just like in Afghanistan, but maybe even our country programs as a whole, and how it also kind of like analyzing the list and seeing, okay, also who in this list lives in a state where we have a local office, and getting them also conditioned to like, here's the work that your direct local office does. So maybe if you found interest here, you could potentially, volunteer or, sign up to get updates from this office. Or maybe you want to even localize, like if you feel like donating, localize those donations. That was something that I think we waited too long to do. And it's something that even now, I don't think we perfected, and I'm still grappling with, like this was a very unique set of advocates. But how do we make them kind of a very regular base?
So I want to bring us back to, obviously today's theme of the session is White House advocacy. So I think that sometimes when, in my experience in this, industry, sometimes the congressional asks, it can take time. And we tend to think that if we're not seeing success immediately, we're not having success. And so like when you were looking and going through the campaign performance, you mentioned a lot of those non-digital successes. Mm-hmm. Do you find that advocacy towards the White House has an expedited process of getting things done? Can you see more results quickly? And is it something that you would encourage other organizations to consider if they haven't already started taking an approach to White House advocacy?
Very layered question. Long and short version of that, yes. I think what a lot of orgs potentially don't do, even though they kind of do it in a different form, is a lot of orgs engage within congressional offices because they recognize that staffers in these offices are always looking to, particularly like NGOs, but outside organizations, to kind of give them updates or get them up to speed on a specific topic because they know we engage directly with constituents. White House administrations on either side of the aisle, no matter who it is in office, do the same thing. So if your organization kind of works in a similar realm, or there's something kind of going on broadly in the news or within the space that's generating a lot of debate, 9 out of 10 times, there's not going to be an expert in the White House. They are going to look for organizations to do that outreach. And a lot of orgs already do that kind of outreach to Congress. So you just have to replicate that to bring that to the White House. In terms of public engagement, it is the same amount of lift. Like I set up our actions to the White House with nearly the same exact parameters I do as with Congress. I mean, for people who use phone to action, the only real difference is I disable editing of emails to the White House because I'm petrified someone's going to say something heinous and say, IRC said that. And then next thing you know, I'm in our CEO's office. But that's like the only difference functionally from our public advocacy in which we set up. But for our private advocacy, we know a lot of times of like, okay, Senate Foreign Relations probably is going to want to have a briefing or testimonies coming up on Afghanistan or Yemen or Syria or any number of countries in the world. So we will get it prepped up and we will try to have enough meetings or offices or outreach to the White House or Congress to say, we have experts in this field. We have country program managers, directors, people who have solutions. So like, we are ready to deliver testimony. We are ready to sit in meetings with you and answer these very hard, nuanced questions. And 9 out of 10 times your organization already does that. It's just, you just haven't done it on the same scale to the White House, but I say that as a person who doesn't have to replicate it, but it's very easy to replicate and duplicate for those purposes.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're coming up on time here. I want to give you a minute or so. Like, is there any last minute advice you might have for organizations wanting to ramp up their advocacy efforts, wanting to, grow their advocates list? Just any last minute words of wisdom from Melinda?
Yeah, I would say there's a lot more tools out there to your disposal than you think. There's a lot more people willing to engage on issues than you think. I mean, we get into the very nitty gritty with our actions sometimes, to things that I'll consider this a safe space for now, that like even would prior to this role bore me to sleep. But there is a base out there that is really willing to engage and will sit and read, for the most part, like wonky materials. So it is worth it to kind of do that outreach. And something that, the IRC even did from then to now is they started a pilot program before I even joined the organization to see if we just simply presented people the facts about refugee resettlement, is that enough to turn people from being, anti-refugee sentiments, like not in my backyard, to being like, okay, yeah, I'm willing to have a conversation on this and figure it out? And the answer was yes. And we have used that to kind of build up a very, very diverse base on within state legislators, within congressional legislators, within White House administrations, of kind of people who can support on our issues, or we know to turn to them for a certain issue, or we can engage with them. So it's something that you can really build up, and getting a base of digital supporters is not as hard as you would think it is. Retaining them is a different debate, but acquiring them isn't that bad. And for folks who might already have digital programs, but they're really looking to boost their SMS lists, there are a lot of vendors who, and this is a secret, I hope none of them are on this call, but there are a lot of vendors who email is their unique identifier, not phone number. So you can negotiate, like, I want to inquire a bunch of people with their phone numbers, but because email's a unique identifier, you're also getting their email. So you can target them in a multi-channel approach. So just think about that when you're doing acquisition. It's not everyone and it's not perfect, and some of them might not allow it, but it is something that sometimes, you should think about, even a multi-channel approach, even if you're focused on, building SMS, because it helps for them to get the same messages on more than one channel.
Well, thank you so much, Melinda, for providing your insight, your wisdom, and going through the successes of the IRC with their outreach to the White House. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. I want to remind people, or just giving a shout out, that the next session coming up with Wonk Week is at 1 p.m. and it's going to be building a Get Out the Vote program for 2024. To join, you'll just want to go back to the main event page and then enter this session. So with that, thank you again to everyone. Happy Halloween out there. And please don't forget to join some additional Wonk Week sessions. Have a great rest of your day and get out there. Let's do some work. Bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you.